6 months after Supervisor Reynolds's inspection, the mining facility on Zerion 7 had become something entirely unprecedented in galactic industrial history. The collaborative innovations that had begun as a desperate attempt to save one young dragon had evolved into a comprehensive model for interspecies cooperation that was being studied and replicated across the Outer Rim territories. Kethmore had grown into a magnificent young dragon whose size and vitality exceeded all expectations for his age group. His emerald scales gleamed with perfect health, and his intelligence had developed to the point where he could understand basic human speech and respond to complex instructions. More remarkably, he had become an integral part of the mining operation itself, using his natural abilities to detect mineral formations and identify potential safety hazards with accuracy that amazed even experienced geologists. He's essentially become our most effective surveying tool. Marcus explained to a delegation of consortium executives who had come to observe the facility's unprecedented productivity levels. Dragons have natural geological sensitivities that our instruments can't match. Kethmore can identify crystal formations and detect structural weaknesses that might take our equipment hours to locate. The young dragon demonstrated his abilities with obvious pride, carefully examining a section of tunnel wall before indicating through a series of chirps and gestures that valuable minerals lay just beneath the surface. When the mining team followed his guidance, they discovered one of the richest crystal deposits found in months. Zarathak watched her son's performance with a mixture of maternal pride and professional satisfaction. Her own status within the Drakari community had been completely transformed. Where she had once been an outcast struggling to keep her child alive, she was now recognized as the mother of the most valuable worker on Zerion 7. More importantly, she had become the liaison between human and Drakari teams, helping to bridge cultural gaps that had previously created tension and inefficiency. The integration of human engineering with Drakari natural abilities has created productivity improvements we never thought possible, she reported to the consortium delegation. Our species' different strengths complement each other in ways that benefit everyone involved. The environmental systems that had been designed to save Kethmore's life had indeed improved conditions for all workers. Respiratory problems among Drakari miners had virtually disappeared, while humans reported better air quality and more comfortable working temperatures. The specialized lighting systems not only supported dragon health, but also reduced eye strain and fatigue among human workers during long shifts. Dr. Kim had documented every aspect of the transformation, creating medical protocols that were being adopted by facilities throughout the galaxy. Her research on interspecies cooperation and environmental optimization had earned recognition from the Galactic Medical Council and offers to lead similar projects on other worlds. What we've learned here extends far beyond mining operations, she explained to the visiting executives. We've demonstrated that when you create optimal conditions for the most vulnerable members of a community, you improve outcomes for everyone. The principles apply to any situation where different species work together. Jake Morrison had been promoted to assistant foreman, taking over many of Marcus's routine duties, so that Marcus could focus on developing new innovations and training other facilities in the integration techniques they had pioneered. The success of Project Brave Flame had made him one of the most sought-after engineers in the consortium, but he had chosen to remain on Zerion 7 to continue the work they had started. This place has become something special, Jake said as he watched Kethmore play with a group of human children who were visiting the facility with their parents. It's not just a mining operation anymore, it's a community, where species differences are seen as advantages rather than obstacles. The most remarkable development had been Kethmore's relationship with Marcus. The young dragon had indeed claimed the human foreman as part of his family structure, but the bond had evolved into something deeper than traditional parental protection. Kethmore seemed to understand that Marcus had not just saved his life, but had created the possibility for a new kind of existence where dragons and humans could work together as equals. He's become a bridge between our species, Marcus observed as Kethmore carefully demonstrated to a young human engineer how to identify different types of crystal formations. He represents the future, a generation that will grow up seeing cooperation as natural rather than revolutionary. The consortium executives were clearly impressed by what they observed, but Marcus knew that their real test would come when they tried to replicate these results elsewhere. The success on Zerion 7 hadn't been achieved through policy changes or administrative directives. It had grown from individuals choosing to care about each other's welfare regardless of species boundaries. The key insight, Marcus explained to the delegation during their final briefing, is that technical solutions are only part of the equation. You can build the most sophisticated environmental systems in the galaxy, but they won't create cooperation if people don't fundamentally respect each other. What happened here started with seeing Kethmore not as an alien creature, but as a child who needed help. As the consortium team prepared to depart, they witnessed one final demonstration of the transformation that had occurred on Zerion 7. The shift change, which had once been a tense transition between human and Drakari crews, had become a collaborative handoff where both species worked together to ensure continuity and safety. Kethmore moved between the groups with easy familiarity, equally comfortable with his own kind, and with the humans who had become his extended family. His presence seemed to symbolize everything they had achieved, a future where differences in biology and culture became sources of strength rather than division. That evening, as the facility settled into its night cycle, Marcus found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. What had begun as a desperate attempt to save a dying dragon had evolved into something that would influence interspecies relations throughout the galaxy. The techniques they had developed, the protocols they had established, and most importantly, the relationships they had built would serve as a model for cooperation that transcended traditional boundaries. Kethmore, now strong enough to fly short distances around the facility, landed on Marcus's shoulder with the kind of casual affection that had become routine between them. The young dragon looked out over the mining operation that had become his home, then chirped softly, and what Marcus had learned was his expression of contentment. "You know what this means, don't you?" Marcus said, gently stroking Kethmore's scales. "You've helped create something bigger than any of us imagined. Other young dragons will grow up in facilities designed with their needs in mind. Other species will learn to work together the way we have. Here." Kethmore responded with a series of chirps that Zarathak had taught Marcus meant family, a concept that had expanded far beyond its original biological meaning to encompass the entire community they had built together. The transformation of Zerion 7 proved that the greatest achievements come not from technological superiority or administrative efficiency, but from the simple recognition that all intelligent beings deserve compassion and support. When humans chose to see beyond species differences and Drakari chose to trust in unprecedented cooperation, they created possibilities that neither could have achieved alone. In the end, the story of Project Brave Flame became more than just a successful rescue mission. It became proof that the future of galactic civilization lay not in the dominance of any single species, but in the patient work of building bridges between different forms of life. And at the center of it all was a young dragon, whose very existence demonstrated that love, determination, and engineering ingenuity could overcome any obstacle, no matter how impossible it might seem. The moment when Kethmore first crawled toward Marcus marked a turning point that none of them had anticipated. The young dragon, despite his weakness, showed a determination that reminded everyone present why his name meant Brave Flame. His golden eyes locked onto Marcus with unmistakable recognition and trust. And when he finally reached the human Foreman, he curled up against Marcus's leg with a contented purr that resonated through the makeshift medical facility. "He recognizes you as part of his family structure," Zarathak said, her voice thick with emotion. "In our culture, this is the highest honor a dragon can bestow. He has claimed you as his protector." Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders like a physical presence. This wasn't just about saving a sick animal anymore. It had become about honoring a bond that transcended species boundaries. The young dragon's trust demanded nothing less than complete commitment to his welfare and future. The next morning brought Reynolds back to the mining facility with reinforcements. He arrived with a full inspection team and explicit authorization to conduct a comprehensive audit of all equipment modifications and resource allocations. Marcus knew that their time had run out. Project Brave Flame was about to be exposed, and the consequences would be severe for everyone involved. "Foreman Chen," Reynolds announced as his team began setting up their monitoring equipment, "I'll need complete access to all facility systems and a detailed accounting of every modification made to consortium property over the past 6 weeks. Before Marcus could respond, Thakron stepped forward with the kind of presence that made even experienced administrators pause. The massive Drakari had clearly prepared for this moment, and his bearing carried the authority of someone speaking for his entire species. "Supervisor Reynolds," Thakron said, his voice carrying the formal cadence of official Drakari discourse, "I must inform you that the recent equipment modifications were undertaken with the full knowledge and support of the Drakari Mining Collective." Reynolds looked genuinely surprised. "I wasn't aware that the Drakari workers had been consulted on technical modifications." "Indeed we were," Thakron continued smoothly. "Foreman Chen has implemented revolutionary improvements to atmospheric processing and environmental control systems that have significantly enhanced our working conditions and productivity. These innovations represent exactly the kind of forward-thinking problem-solving that the consortium claims to value." Other Drakari workers began gathering around Thakron, their massive forms creating an impressive display of solidarity. Marcus realized they were implementing a carefully coordinated strategy to reframe the entire situation. Instead of unauthorized experimentation, Project Brave Flame was being presented as collaborative innovation that had improved the mining operations' effectiveness. "The productivity reports certainly support improved efficiency," Reynolds admitted, consulting his datapad with obvious confusion. "But that doesn't explain some of the more unusual modifications. For instance, the light spectrum adjustments serve no apparent industrial function." Dr. Kim chose that moment to join the conversation, carrying her medical scanner and wearing the kind of confident expression that suggested she had been preparing for this confrontation. "Actually, those modifications were part of a comprehensive health and safety initiative I've been coordinating with Foreman Chen." She gestured toward the Drakari workers with professional authority. "Extended exposure to suboptimal lighting conditions was causing health problems among our Drakari colleagues. The spectrum adjustments provide therapeutic benefits that reduce sick leave and improve overall worker wellness. The consortium's own medical protocols support such interventions when they enhance operational efficiency." Reynolds was beginning to look overwhelmed by the coordinated explanations coming from multiple directions. His inspection team, meanwhile, was discovering that every modification they examined had been implemented with impressive technical skill and could be justified through existing consortium guidelines for worker safety and operational efficiency. "What about the atmospheric processing modifications?" Reynolds pressed, clearly trying to find something that couldn't be explained away. "Improved air quality protocols," Marcus replied promptly. "The Drakari respiratory system requires specific atmospheric conditions for optimal performance. By providing these conditions, we've reduced respiratory-related sick leave by 30% and increased overall work efficiency by 15%. The numbers were accurate. Project Brave Flame's environmental systems had indeed improved conditions for all the Drakari workers, even though they had been designed specifically for Kethmore's needs. The unintended benefit gave their explanations credibility that Reynolds couldn't argue with. As the inspection continued, it became clear that the consortium team was finding exactly what they had been told to expect: innovative improvements that enhanced operational efficiency while maintaining safety standards. The modifications that had seemed suspicious in isolation made perfect sense when viewed as part of a comprehensive workplace optimization initiative. "I have to admit," Reynolds said as his team completed their examination, "these modifications represent some of the most sophisticated environmental control work I've seen in 20 years of mining operations. The technical skill required to implement these systems is impressive. Foreman Chen is exceptional at solving complex problems," Dr. Kim said with genuine pride. "His ability to see beyond conventional approaches has made this facility one of the most successful operations in the Outer Rim territories." Reynolds spent another hour reviewing documentation and conducting interviews with workers, but the consistent narrative of collaborative innovation and improved efficiency left him with no grounds for criticism. If anything, his report would likely recommend that other mining facilities adopt similar approaches to worker wellness and environmental optimization. That evening, after Reynolds and his team had departed, the true magnitude of what they had accomplished began to sink in. Not only had they saved Kethmore's life, but they had also transformed the relationship between human and Drakari workers in ways that would have lasting implications for the entire mining operation. "You realize what you've done?" Zarathak said as they watched Kethmore play with a piece of crystalline formation that Dr. Kim had fashioned into a toy. "You've created a new model for interspecies cooperation. Other facilities will study what happened here." Marcus watched the young dragon's playful antics with satisfaction. Kethmore was not just surviving, he was thriving, showing all the curiosity and energy that characterized healthy dragon development. His scales had regained their brilliant emerald color, and his golden eyes sparkled with intelligence and mischief. "More importantly," Marcus said, "we've proven that when different species work together toward a common goal, they can achieve things that seemed impossible. Kethmore is alive because humans and Drakari chose to see beyond their differences." Dr. Kim joined them, carrying her latest medical readings. "His development is actually ahead of normal ranges now. The environmental controls we created aren't just adequate, they're optimal. He's going to grow up stronger and healthier than dragons raised in traditional environments." As if he understood the conversation, Kethmore looked up from his play and chirped happily at the assembled group. Then, with the kind of determination that had carried him through his illness, he began attempting to climb onto Marcus's shoulder, a position that young dragons traditionally reserved for their closest family members. The dear sight of the small dragon trusting completely in the human who had saved his life represented something unprecedented in galactic history. It was a symbol of what could be achieved when compassion transcended species boundaries, and when people were willing to risk everything for the sake of protecting the innocent. Supervisor Reynolds was everything Marcus had come to dislike about the Galactic Mining Consortium's management structure, a thin, sharp-featured man who seemed to view efficiency reports with more warmth than he showed to actual people. Reynolds had built his career on finding and eliminating what he called operational irregularities. "Foreman Chen," Reynolds said, his tone carrying the artificial friendliness that preceded most corporate interrogations. "I'm sure you're wondering why I'm here for an unscheduled inspection." Marcus kept his expression neutral while his mind raced through potential explanations for the equipment anomalies Reynolds had undoubtedly discovered. "Just routine business, I assume. We're always happy to demonstrate our operational efficiency." "Excellent attitude," Reynolds replied, consulting his datapad with the kind of attention most people reserved for religious texts. "Though I have to say, your recent resource allocation patterns are quite interesting. According to our monitoring systems, you've been conducting an unusual amount of maintenance during off hours, and several pieces of equipment have been showing energy consumption patterns that don't match their standard operational profiles." Dr. Kim, who had been monitoring the conversation from across the command center, exchanged a meaningful glance with Marcus. They had known this moment would come eventually, but the timing couldn't have been worse. Kethmore had shown significant improvement over the past few days, but he was still critically dependent on the life support systems they had constructed. Any interruption in treatment could undo all their progress. "Equipment maintenance is an ongoing necessity in this environment," Marcus said carefully. "The extreme conditions here require constant adjustments and modifications to maintain optimal performance." Reynolds nodded with the kind of enthusiasm that suggested he was enjoying the conversation far more than Marcus was. Of course. Though I have to wonder about some of these specific modifications. For instance, the atmospheric processing system has been configured to produce gas mixtures that don't correspond to any standard industrial application, and the crystal processing arrays have been modified to emit light spectrums that serve no apparent mining function." Marcus realized that Reynolds knew far more than he was initially letting on. The consortium's monitoring systems were more sophisticated than he had anticipated, and his attempts at stealth had been less successful than he'd hoped. "Sometimes innovation requires experimentation," Marcus said, deciding that partial honesty might be more effective than continued evasion. "We've been exploring ways to optimize our systems for better efficiency and worker safety." "Innovation is certainly admirable," Reynolds agreed, his tone taking on a harder edge. "But unauthorized experimentation with company equipment is a serious violation of consortium protocols. I'm going to need a complete accounting of all modifications made to industrial systems over the past month, along with detailed justifications for each change." Before Marcus could respond, An alarm began sounding throughout the facility. The emergency beacon indicated a serious problem in one of the main mining shafts, exactly the kind of crisis that demanded immediate attention from the foreman and his entire team. "We'll have to continue this conversation later," Marcus said, genuine relief evident in his voice. "Emergency protocols take priority over administrative reviews." Reynolds looked frustrated but couldn't argue with safety regulations. "Of course, but I'll need that documentation as soon as the situation is resolved." The emergency turned out to be a serious but manageable problem. A partial tunnel collapse that had trapped 2 workers and damaged several pieces of equipment. Marcus coordinated the rescue operation with the kind of focused intensity that had made him legendary among mining crews, while Dr. Kim provided medical support for the injured workers. The crisis provided a temporary reprieve, but Marcus knew it had only delayed the inevitable confrontation. Reynolds wasn't the type of administrator to forget about irregularities, and his investigation would eventually lead him to discover Project Brave Flame. The question was whether they could find a way to protect Kethmore while dealing with the consortium's scrutiny. That evening, as Marcus checked on the young dragon's progress, he found Zarathak deep in conversation with several other Drakari workers. The group fell silent when they noticed his approach, but he could sense an undercurrent of tension that hadn't been there before. "Is everything all right?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. One of the older Drakari, a massive male named Thakron whose scales bore the scars of decades of mining work, stepped forward with obvious reluctance. "Foreman Chen, we have heard of the consortium inspector's interest in your recent activities." Marcus waited, knowing that Drakari culture valued directness, but also required careful attention to social hierarchies and honor obligations. "We also know of your efforts to save Zarathak's offspring," Thakron continued. "What you have done is unprecedented. No other species has ever risked so much for a Drakari child that was not their own." "Any parent would understand," Marcus replied simply. Thakron exchanged glances with the other Drakari before continuing. "In our culture, such actions create what you might call a debt of honor. We cannot allow you to face consequences alone for choices made in service of our kind." The implications of Thakron's words slowly sank in. The Drakari workers were offering to support Project Brave Flame openly, even if it meant facing punishment from the consortium. For a proud species that had traditionally viewed humans as inferior partners in the mining operation, this represented a fundamental shift in their perspective. "We appreciate the gesture," Marcus said carefully, "but I'm not sure how much difference it would make to someone like Reynolds. He's more concerned with regulations than with cultural honor." "Perhaps," Thakron agreed, "but there are other considerations. The productivity of this mining operation has increased significantly since your arrival. The consortium values results above all else. If the Drakari workers were to express collective support for your methods, including your recent innovations, it might provide a different context for Reynolds's investigation." Zarathak looked up from where she had been monitoring Kethmore's vital signs. "You would do this? Even knowing it might bring scrutiny to all of us?" "Honor demands no less," Thakron replied with simple dignity. "Besides, we have watched your human friends work. They do not think like consortium administrators. They solve problems that others consider impossible. Perhaps it is time our own thinking evolved as well." The conversation was interrupted by Dr. Kim's excited voice from the medical monitoring station. "Marcus, you need to see this. Kethmore's showing signs of independent thermoregulation for the first time since we started treatment." They gathered around the young dragon, who was indeed looking more alert and responsive than anyone had seen him since Marcus's first discovery of the secret shelter. His scales had regained much of their natural luster, and his breathing had become strong and regular. Most remarkably, he was beginning to show the kind of curiosity and playfulness that characterized healthy young dragons. "The treatment is working beyond our most optimistic projections," Dr. Kim said, her voice filled with wonder. "His metabolic functions are approaching normal ranges, and his growth indicators suggest he'll reach full developmental milestones." As they watched, Kethmore managed to lift his head and focus on Marcus with unmistakable intelligence. The young dragon made a soft chirping sound that Zarathak translated as a greeting, then attempted to crawl toward the human who had helped save his life. Dr. Kim's involvement transformed Project Brave Flame from a desperate engineering experiment into a sophisticated medical intervention. Her knowledge of xenobiology, combined with Marcus's engineering expertise, created possibilities that neither could have achieved alone. The first priority is stabilizing his metabolic processes, Dr. Kim explained as she conducted a thorough examination of Kethmore. Young dragons are essentially living furnaces. They need to maintain specific internal temperatures while processing incredible amounts of energy. Right now, his system is shutting down because he can't generate enough heat to sustain basic functions. She worked with gentle efficiency, taking biological samples and running them through her portable diagnostic equipment. The readings confirmed what they could all see. Kethmore was dying by degrees, his body consuming itself in a desperate attempt to maintain vital functions. The good news is that his organ systems are still fundamentally healthy, Dr. Kim continued. If we can address the environmental factors and nutritional deficiencies, his natural regenerative capabilities should allow for a complete recovery. Zarathak listened intently, hope and skepticism warring in her expression. You speak as though this is merely a medical problem to be solved. But the resources required, the risk to your careers, no rational being would take such chances for a child that is not their own. Dr. Kim paused in her work to look directly at Zarathak. 3 years ago, my own daughter was dying of a rare genetic condition. The treatment required experimental procedures that weren't approved by standard medical protocols. A team of doctors and researchers risked their careers to save her life. She gestured toward Kethmore. She's healthy now, studying xenobiology because she wants to help other species the way they helped her. Sometimes the right thing to do isn't the same as the approved thing to do. The next phase of the project required careful coordination and absolute secrecy. Marcus used his authority as foreman to schedule extended maintenance periods that would provide cover for their activities, while Dr. Kim began synthesizing the complex nutritional supplements that Kethmore needed. Working during night shifts and using equipment that was officially offline for routine servicing, they began constructing what amounted to a portable intensive care unit designed specifically for young dragons. The atmospheric control system proved to be the most complex component. Young dragons required not just specific gas mixtures, but also carefully controlled pressure variations that mimicked the natural breathing patterns of adult dragons. Marcus designed a system that used repurposed mining ventilation equipment to create these conditions, while Dr. Kim monitored the biological effects to ensure they were achieving the desired results. The light therapy system required equally innovative solutions. The wavelengths needed to trigger proper metabolic function in young dragons weren't naturally produced by any standard lighting technology, but Marcus discovered that by running specific mineral formations through the crystal processing arrays, he could create emissions that closely matched the required spectrum. The process was energy-intensive and had to be carefully timed to avoid detection, but the results were immediately visible. Within hours of exposure to the proper light spectrum, Kethmore's scales began to show subtle improvements in color and texture. His breathing, while still labored, became more regular, and for the first time in weeks, he showed interest in food when Zarathak offered it. It's working, Dr. Kim said, monitoring the young dragon's vital signs through her diagnostic equipment. His metabolic rate is increasing and his body temperature is stabilizing. But we need to be careful not to push too hard too fast. His system has been in survival mode for so long that rapid changes could cause more harm than good. The nutritional supplements required the most delicate preparation. Dr. Kim worked with Zarathak to understand the complex dietary requirements of young dragons, discovering that they needed not just specific minerals and vitamins, but also certain enzymes that could only be derived from particular types of crystalline formations. Fortunately, Zirion 7's geology provided access to most of the required materials, though extracting and processing them without authorization required considerable creativity. Marcus found himself working longer hours than ever before, splitting his time between his official duties as foreman and his secret role in Project Brave Flame. The strain was beginning to show, and other members of his team started asking questions about his increased use of equipment and resources. Boss, the mineral processing logs show some unusual activity during the night shifts, reported Jake Morrison, one of Marcus's most trusted supervisors. Nothing wrong with the work itself, but the patterns don't match our standard protocols. Marcus realized he was reaching the limits of what he could accomplish through stealth and misdirection. The project was becoming too complex and resource-intensive to hide indefinitely. Sooner or later, someone would notice the discrepancies and start asking questions he couldn't answer without revealing the truth. That evening, he made a decision that would change the entire dynamic of the mining operation. Instead of continuing to work in secret, he decided to bring Jake into the project. The supervisor was known for his loyalty and discretion, and more importantly, he had young children of his own back on Earth. The revelation of Kethmore's existence had exactly the effect Marcus had hoped for. Jake's initial shock quickly gave way to determination, as he saw the young dragon's condition and understood the scope of what Marcus and Dr. Kim were attempting. "How many people know about this?" Jake asked after spending an hour examining the makeshift medical facility they had constructed. "Just the three of us," Marcus replied. "But we're reaching the point where we need more help. The project is getting too big to handle with our current resources." Jake nodded thoughtfully. "What about the other Drakari workers? Do they know you're trying to save him?" Zarathak, who had been quietly monitoring Kethmore's response to the latest round of treatments, looked up with a pained expression. "They know. They also believe it is a waste of resources that will ultimately fail. In their minds, I am prolonging suffering rather than accepting natural law. What do you think?" Jake asked her directly. For the first time since Marcus had met her, Zarathak smiled, a subtle expression that transformed her entire face. "I think that humans do not understand the concept of impossible, and perhaps that is exactly what we need." The next morning brought unexpected complications. Supervisor Reynolds from the consortium's oversight division arrived for an unscheduled inspection, citing reports of irregular equipment usage and resource allocation. Marcus knew that Project Brave Flame was about to face its greatest test, and the outcome would determine not just Kethmore's fate, but the future of everyone involved in trying to save him. Marcus spent the next hour examining the makeshift shelter Zarathak had constructed, his engineer's mind cataloging both the impressive adaptations and the critical shortcomings. She had done remarkable work with limited resources, but the fundamental problems remained unsolvable without proper equipment and expertise. "The temperature regulation is actually brilliant," he said, running his hands along the polished crystal formations that redirected geothermal heat. "But you're fighting a losing battle with humidity and air quality. Young dragons need specific atmospheric conditions that this environment can't provide." Zarathak watched him with careful attention, her protective instincts still on high alert. "You speak as though you understand our biology." "I don't," Marcus admitted. "But I understand engineering, and I know that every biological system has specific requirements for optimal function. Tell me what Kethmore needs to thrive, and I'll figure out how to provide it." The conversation that followed revealed the depth of the challenge they faced. Young dragons required not just proper nutrition, but also specific mineral supplements that could only be absorbed in the presence of certain atmospheric gases. They needed temperature variations that mimicked the natural cave systems of the Drakari homeworld. And most critically, they required exposure to specific wavelengths of light that triggered essential metabolic processes. On our homeworld, the caves contain crystalline formations that naturally produce the required light spectrum, Zarathak explained. The minerals in the water also provide nutrients that cannot be replicated artificially. Marcus nodded, his mind already working through potential solutions. But they can be synthesized. The mining operation here has some of the most advanced mineral processing equipment in the galaxy. If I can get detailed specifications of what he needs, I can probably manufacture it. Even if that were possible, Zarathak said, her tone carefully neutral. Such an undertaking would require resources and approval from the Galactic Mining Consortium. They would never authorize the use of industrial equipment to save a single Drakari hatchling. She was right, of course. The consortium was notoriously profit-focused, and any unauthorized use of equipment could result in severe penalties, including termination and criminal charges. But Marcus had been thinking about that problem since the moment he'd seen the dying dragon. "They might not authorize it," he said slowly, "but they also don't monitor every piece of equipment every hour of every day, especially not during maintenance cycles." Zarathak's eyes widened as she grasped the implications. "You would risk your position for a child that is not your own?" "I've seen what parents will do for their children," Marcus replied. Human, Drakari, or any other species, the love is the same. Besides, this mining operation owes most of its success to innovations that started with impossible problems. Maybe it's time to tackle another one. Over the next few days, Marcus began implementing what he privately called Project Brave Flame. Working during scheduled maintenance periods and using his authority as foreman to requisition equipment for atmospheric optimization studies, he began constructing what was essentially a portable life support system designed specifically for young dragons. The light spectrum problem proved to be the most challenging. The required wavelengths weren't naturally produced by any of the standard lighting systems on Zirion 7, but Marcus discovered that by modifying the crystal processing arrays, he could create a specialized emission pattern. The modifications were subtle enough to avoid detection during routine inspections, but effective enough to provide the biological triggers Kethmore needed. Creating the proper atmospheric composition required even more creativity. Marcus repurposed atmospheric scrubbers from decommissioned equipment, modifying their filtration systems to introduce specific gases in precise concentrations. The work had to be done in small increments to avoid suspicion, with each component appearing to be routine maintenance or minor efficiency improvements. The most difficult challenge was creating the mineral supplements. Zarathak provided detailed information about the chemical composition required, but synthesizing it from available materials required access to the main processing plant during off hours. Marcus found himself working double shifts, using legitimate maintenance tasks as cover for his unauthorized experiments. Dr. Sarah Kim, the chief medical officer for the mining colony, noticed Marcus's increased activity during her routine rounds. A sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who had seen too many mining accidents to ignore unusual patterns, she confronted him after catching him in the processing plant at 3 a.m. for the third time in a week. "Either you're having the worst string of equipment failures in mining history," she said, arms crossed as she watched him work on a mineral extraction array, "or you're working on something you don't want anyone to know about." Marcus weighed his options carefully. Dr. Kim was known for her strict adherence to regulations, but she was also famous for her compassion toward anyone who was suffering. After a moment's hesitation, he decided to trust her with the truth. "If I show you something, will you promise to hear me out before making any reports?" Dr. Kim's expression grew more serious. "Marcus, you're scaring me. What's going on?" Instead of answering directly, Marcus led her to the abandoned mining shaft. The journey through the unstable tunnels was treacherous enough that Dr. Kim began to question the wisdom of following him, but her curiosity outweighed her caution. When they reached Zarathak's shelter, the scene that greeted them was heartbreaking. The young dragon was noticeably weaker than he had been just days before, his breathing so labored that each breath seemed like it might be his last. Zarathak sat beside him, gently stroking his scales while humming a melody that Marcus now recognized as a traditional Drakari song for the dying. Dr. Kim's medical training kicked in immediately. She approached slowly, her movements careful and non-threatening, and began examining the young dragon with the practiced efficiency of someone who had treated dozens of different species. Severe malnutrition, atmospheric poisoning, and what looks like mineral deficiency syndrome, she diagnosed after a few minutes. "How long has he been like this?" "Too long," Zarathak replied, her voice barely audible. "I have done everything I can, but it is not enough." Dr. Kim looked at Marcus with new understanding. "The equipment modifications. You're trying to create a proper environment for him." Marcus nodded. "The theory is sound, but I need help with the biological aspects. I can engineer the systems, but I need someone who understands how they'll interact with Drakari physiology." For a long moment, Dr. Kim was silent, studying the dying dragon and his desperate mother. Then she knelt beside Kethmore and gently placed her hand on his head, her expression softening with the kind of compassion that had made her legendary among the mining crews. "What do you need?" she asked. The first thing Marcus noticed was the smell, not the sulfurous odor he expected from the planet's core, but something cleaner, almost sweet. The second thing was the soft glow emanating from what appeared to be a carefully constructed shelter, built into a natural cave formation. Crystalline formations on the walls had been polished to reflect heat more efficiently, and salvaged mining equipment had been repurposed into a primitive but effective life support system. Then he heard it, a soft whimpering sound that made his heart clench with recognition. It was the sound of something young and in pain, calling for its mother. Marcus crept closer, using his thermal scanner to avoid loose rocks that might give away his presence. Through a gap in the makeshift shelter, he saw Zarathak hunched over something small and motionless. Her usually controlled demeanor had cracked completely, and she was making soft clicking sounds that he recognized as Drakari expressions of grief and desperation. What she was caring for made Marcus's breath catch in his throat. A young dragon, barely the size of a house cat, lay curled against her massive form. Its scales, which should have been vibrant and healthy, were dull and patchy. The creature's breathing was labored, and even from his hiding spot, Marcus could see that it was severely malnourished. This explained everything: Zarathak's secretive behavior, her refusal to eat, her desperate work ethic. She was feeding her rations to the young dragon, trying to keep it alive in impossible conditions. But it wasn't working. The dragon was dying, and Zarathak was slowly starving herself in a futile attempt to save it. Marcus knew enough about Drakari biology to understand the implications. Young dragons required specific nutrients and temperature conditions to survive their first year of life. The harsh environment of Zirion 7, combined with limited food supplies, created a death sentence for any Drakari offspring. No wonder the other workers avoided her. In their society, having a child in such conditions was considered either foolish or selfish. But as Marcus watched Zarathak gently stroke the dying dragon's head, whispering what sounded like lullabies in her native language, he didn't see foolishness. He saw a mother refusing to give up on her child, even when logic demanded surrender. The young dragon stirred weakly, lifting its head just enough to look at its mother with eyes that held the same golden intelligence as Zarathak's. It tried to make a sound, perhaps calling for food or comfort, but only managed a pitiful wheeze. Zarathak immediately offered it water from her personal supply, then carefully placed a piece of her daily food ration near its mouth. Marcus realized he was witnessing something sacred, the kind of desperate love that transcended species boundaries. Every parent in the galaxy, regardless of their biological origin, would recognize the scene before him. Zarathak wasn't just trying to save her child. She was pouring her own life force into the attempt, holding nothing back. The young dragon couldn't manage more than a few drops of water. Its breathing became more labored, and Zarathak's clicking sounds took on an increasingly frantic quality. She was losing the battle, and she knew it. But she continued anyway, offering comfort and warmth even as hope slipped away. Marcus made a decision that would have far-reaching consequences for everyone on Zirion 7. He stepped out of his hiding spot, knowing that his presence would be seen as either salvation or betrayal, depending on Zarathak's reaction. "How long has he been sick?" Marcus asked quietly, deliberately using a calm, professional tone despite the emotional weight of the moment. Zarathak spun around with lightning speed, her natural instincts putting her between Marcus and her child. Her golden eyes blazed with a mixture of fear, shame, and protective fury. For a moment, Marcus thought she might actually attack him, but then the fight seemed to drain out of her all at once. "You should not be here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This place is forbidden." "A lot of things are forbidden," Marcus replied, slowly approaching with his hands visible and empty. "But that doesn't make them wrong." He gestured toward the young dragon, which had managed to lift its head slightly at the sound of new voices. "What's his name?" The question seemed to catch Zarathak off guard. For a moment, her carefully maintained composure cracked, and Marcus saw the exhausted, terrified mother underneath the stoic worker facade. "Kethmore," she said finally. "It means brave flame in our language." Marcus nodded respectfully. "How old is he?" 4 months. He should be flying by now, learning to hunt." Zarathak's voice cracked slightly. Instead, he can barely lift his head. "What happened to his father?" The question hit like a physical blow. Zarathak's scales seemed to darken, and her expression became guarded once again. "There is no father. There is only me," Marcus understood. In Drakari society, single parenthood carried significant social stigma. A female who couldn't attract or keep a mate was considered flawed, and her offspring were often seen as equally defective. No wonder the other workers avoided her. They viewed both Zarathak and her child as genetic dead ends. "The other workers know about him," Marcus said. It wasn't a question. Zarathak nodded slowly. "They know. They also know he will die soon, and that I will follow shortly after. In their minds, this is natural selection correcting a mistake. What do you think? The question seemed to surprise her. What I think does not matter. What matters is keeping Keth more comfortable until the end. Marcus looked at the young dragon, noting the way its scales caught the artificial light despite their dulled appearance. Even sick and malnourished, there was something magnificent about the creature. Its bone structure suggested it would grow to be large and powerful, and its eyes held an alertness that indicated high intelligence. What if I told you there might be another option? Marcus said carefully. Zarathak's head snapped up, hope and suspicion warring in her expression. Humans do not understand Drakari physiology. Your medicine cannot help him. Maybe not, Marcus agreed. But human engineering might be able to create an environment where he can help himself. For the first time since he'd discovered her secret, Zarathak looked directly at him with something other than fear or shame. In her golden eyes, Marcus saw the faintest flicker of hope, and he knew that everything was about to change for all of them. The mining colony of Zerion 7 hummed with the constant vibration of heavy machinery carving through alien rock. Marcus Chen wiped sweat from his brow as he supervised the afternoon shift, his weathered hands checking the thermal readings on his datapad. The human foreman had been managing this operation for 3 years, turning what was once considered an impossible extraction site into the most productive mining facility in the Outer Rim territories. The Drakari had initially scoffed at human engineering capabilities. Their proud reptilian race had dominated space mining for centuries, using their natural fire-breathing abilities and massive strength to work in conditions that would kill most other species. But humans had something the Drakari didn't expect: ingenuity born from desperation, and an almost reckless willingness to adapt. Marcus had arrived on Zerion 7 when the Galactic Mining Consortium was ready to abandon the site. The rare crystals buried deep in the planet's core were essential for faster-than-light communication arrays, but the extreme heat and toxic gases made extraction nearly impossible. The Drakari workers could only manage short shifts before even their heat-resistant biology was overwhelmed. That's when Marcus proposed something radical. Instead of fighting the hostile environment, why not embrace it? He designed a revolutionary cooling system that redirected the planet's geothermal energy to power the mining equipment, while simultaneously creating breathable working conditions. The Drakari watched in amazement as human engineers worked alongside automated systems in areas that had previously been death traps. The success brought an uneasy peace between the species. Drakari miners, proud creatures standing nearly 8 feet tall with scales that shimmered like precious metals, found themselves working under human supervision for the first time in their history. Marcus treated them with respect, learning their customs and even picking up fragments of their ancient language. He understood that respect had to be earned, not demanded. Zarathak was different from the other Drakari workers. Where most of her kind exuded confidence and barely controlled aggression, she moved with careful precision and spoke in measured tones. Her emerald scales caught the artificial lighting in ways that reminded Marcus of Earth's deep forests, and her golden eyes held an intelligence that seemed to catalog every detail around her. She had been assigned to Marcus's team 6 months ago, and he quickly discovered she was one of the most skilled miners he'd ever worked with. Her fire breath could be controlled with surgical precision, melting through rock formations without damaging the delicate crystal structures they sought. More importantly, she had an intuitive understanding of the planet's geology that even surprised the human survey teams. But Marcus noticed something troubling about Zarathak. While other Drakari took regular breaks and socialized during meal periods, she worked almost continuously. Her meal rations, already smaller than what her species typically required, were often left untouched. When questioned, she would simply nod and claim she wasn't hungry. But Marcus could see the subtle signs of malnourishment in the way her scales had lost some of their luster. The other Drakari seemed to avoid her, though Marcus couldn't understand why. In their culture, strength and capability were highly valued, and Zarathak possessed both in abundance. There were whispered conversations that stopped when he approached, meaningful glances exchanged when they thought he wasn't watching. Something was happening that the human foreman wasn't being told about. Marcus had learned enough about Drakari society to know they valued directness, so he decided to confront the issue head-on. During a scheduled maintenance break, he approached Zarathak as she continued working despite the official downtime. "You're pushing yourself too hard," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "Even your people need rest." Zarathak's hand stilled on her equipment, but she didn't look up. Humans work continuously. I am simply matching your dedication. Humans also eat regularly and sleep 8 hours out of every 24. When's the last time you did either? For a moment, Marcus thought she might actually answer honestly. Her golden eyes met his and he saw something there, fear maybe or desperation. But then the moment passed and her expression returned to its usual controlled mask. I am fine, Foreman Chen. Your concern is noted but unnecessary. That night, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. He'd worked with enough different species to recognize the signs of someone carrying a burden too heavy for them to bear alone. The way Zarathak's hands trembled slightly when she thought no one was looking. The careful way she rationed even her breathing. These were the behaviors of someone trying to conserve energy for something more important than her own. Survival. The breakthrough came 3 days later, when Marcus was reviewing security footage for a routine safety inspection. The cameras in the mining tunnels operated on motion sensors to conserve power, activating only when someone passed through certain checkpoints. What he found made him review the footage 3 times to be sure he wasn't imagining things. Late in the night cycle, long after the official end of her shift, Zarathak was making regular trips to one of the abandoned mining shafts. The area had been sealed off months ago when geological surveys indicated unstable rock formations, but somehow she was accessing it without triggering any safety alarms. More concerning was what she was carrying: portions of her food rations, medical supplies from the emergency kits, and what looked like salvaged heating elements from damaged equipment. Marcus made a decision that would change everything. Instead of confronting her immediately or reporting the security breach, he chose to follow her. If Zarathak was in trouble, if she needed help, then he would find out what was happening and figure out how to fix it. The Drakari had earned his respect as both a worker and a person, and he wasn't about to abandon her when she clearly needed support. The abandoned shaft was a maze of partially collapsed tunnels and unstable rock formations. Marcus followed the heat signatures on his scanner, moving carefully through passages that groaned ominously with every step. The deeper he went, the more convinced he became that Zarathak was hiding something significant in these dangerous depths. What he discovered would challenge everything he thought he knew about the Drakari, about loyalty, and about the lengths a parent will go to protect their child. In the deepest part of the abandoned mine, where the heat from Zarian 7's core made the air shimmer like a mirage, Marcus found Zarathak's secret.